Hello, welcome to part 4 of how to climb out of our pit of sin. So this video is going to be kind of different. It's basically God giving me a bunch of analogies of how obeying Him is really not as hard as we think. And it's just because we don't have the right perspective. That's the only reason why we have a hard time obeying Him. And He gave me a bunch of analogies to explain this. So he said that there's 2 reasons why you would not be able to easily obey me. The first reason is that you don't see the benefit, meaning you're not aware of how amazing it is to be close to me. You don't realize the amount of love, joy, peace, strength, and just overall abundance that I will give you if you get close to me. So that's the first reason why we would have a hard time obeying, because we don't feel the amazing gift that we would receive after we obeyed. Number 2, the second reason why we would have a hard time obeying is if we are not sober-minded enough to really understand the consequences of disobedience. Disobedience has the consequence of death, torment, and torture. And those are the consequences of disobedience to the laws that God created. They're natural consequences. It's nothing that God is trying to do to hurt us. It's just the consequence of breaking laws is you get in trouble. Simple as that. And if you hurt others, you get hurt. If you hurt God's laws, you get hurt. And it's just that simple. So if we really were grounded and sober enough to really get the consequences of our actions, we would never sin, because we would never want to hurt God or others or ourselves the way that we're hurting ourselves when we sin. And so God gave me a couple analogies. Well, first of all, he told me this. He said, everyone obeys something on a daily basis, even when at least a part of them doesn't feel like it. He said, whether you're a follower of me or Satan, you will always be commanded to follow laws that you don't always feel like following. And you will also always have to sacrifice something in order to follow whatever master you follow. And so he gave me a bunch of examples of people following certain masters in their life and making certain things lords of their life. But in order for them to do that, they have to sacrifice something else that they want. So I just wrote down 9 examples. There's probably hundreds of examples, but these are the 9 that came to me right away. The desire for pleasure. So this can come at the expense of the body's health and overall strength. The desire for control and power. This can come at the expense of peace of mind and a loving connection with others. The desire for entertainment. This can come at the expense of knowledge and wisdom. The desire for security. This comes sometimes at the expense of having self-respect and courage. The desire for emotional comfort. This sometimes comes at the expense of psychological maturity. The desire to be part of societal norms. This sometimes comes at the expense of having integrity and conviction and being able to stand apart from the crowd and do what's right. The next one is the desire for stability, and this can come at the expense of developing flexibility and strength of character. And the next one is the desire for individuality and freedom, which can come at the expense of learning how to sacrifice for the larger good. And the last one I thought of really quickly was the desire for thrill seeking. This obviously can come at the expense of safety, physical safety. So people will definitely sacrifice certain things that they want to have something else that they want. And people do it every day, all the time. Everybody is used to doing that. We're not used to sacrificing things for God because we live in this wicked sea of darkness. But we're used to having to sacrifice something in order to get what we want in some other way. So if we really saw that having God's love and joy and peace was worth everything to us, if we knew how amazing it would feel, we would sacrifice our smaller desires easily and effortlessly in order to receive that kind of strength and love and power from God. And the next thing that God told me was an analogy of he just gave me a few examples of how we sacrifice for our relationships in life, because we want to receive what we get out of the relationship. So therefore, we're willing to sacrifice. So he gave me an example of a committed romantic relationship. You know, sometimes we're in a committed relationship and we have fleeting feelings of wanting to go outside of that commitment, but we wouldn't act on it because we want that person to stay with us, and that person would probably leave us if we went outside of our commitment. So therefore, we're willing to sacrifice that in order to have that relationship and have that stability of the relationship. And number two, if we're parents, I gave you this analogy before in the other video, we are willing to spend time and sacrifice our time and energy to feed our kids and teach our children and care about them, because we want to have that intimate relationship with them. And we want them to grow up healthy and strong so that they're not a burden on society and on us as they grow. So we're willing to sacrifice that time, and nobody has to really tell us to do it or beg us to do it. We just automatically do it. And then number three, if we have a really good friend, then we try to be a good friend to that person so that they will remain our friend. We don't want to be rude to them or hurt them or be disloyal to them. And the fourth example is having a job that we like. If we have a job we like and we value the income from it and we value our life that we have from the income, we would want to do a decent job at it because we don't want to get fired, right? So these are just some really common examples that almost everyone follows and is able to do without even thinking about it. And God said, people are used to sacrificing to get what they want. They're just not used to sacrificing to get my love because they're not used to having it. And then the other thing he said was, he gave me this analogy. He said, look, okay, so this is not word for word. This is just the analogy he gave me. He gave me the analogy of driving a car. And he said, regarding driving a car, do you always feel like obeying the traffic laws? Do you always feel like sitting at a red light? Do you always feel like keeping the speed limit? He said, do you always feel like dealing with traffic while you're on your way to get somewhere? So he named a bunch of things that are maybe I don't feel like doing when I'm driving, but I do them anyway. He said, you do these things, you obey these laws, and you deal with traffic, because if you don't, you might get a ticket or get in an accident or even hurt yourself or someone else. He said, you don't get impatient and annoyed at the traffic all the time. Most of the time, if there's traffic, you just turn on the music and try to pass the time in another way, because what's the point of getting all upset over it when you can't do anything about it? He said, so people are used to obeying laws that they don't want to obey because they can get to their destination safely. They're used to obeying traffic laws so that they can get to their destination safely. He said, so it's the same with me. He said, I want you to obey my laws so that you can get to your destination safely. And your destination is eternal life with me, to be close to me. He said, you chose sin and you separated yourself from me. And now if you want to come back to me, you've got to obey the traffic laws. And that way you will be able to come back to me safely. And so he gave me this analogy of 4 different types of drivers. He said, let's say there are 4 types of drivers. Number 1, there's people who have wisdom and they're humble enough to obey all the traffic laws. They always obey all the laws no matter what they feel like doing. And these people are safe drivers. They will reach their destination safely, most likely, right? Especially if they learn to be defensive drivers and they're always on the lookout for anybody who might be disobeying the laws. So they're defensive and safe drivers, right? So then you have the second type of driver. People who have not always obeyed all the traffic laws, but after they get some punishments and some fines, some tickets, maybe they get into minor accidents, they decide to change their driving habits and become safer drivers. Okay? These are people that become Christians and change their life, right? And then you have the third type of drivers. Then these people get punishments and fines, and they get into accidents, maybe even bigger accidents. But they still have a really hard time changing their driving habits. They have a hard time connecting the dots between their bad driving habits and the fines and the accidents they got into. These are people that are so stubborn that sometimes they need a more serious accident, like even maybe a brush with death, in order for them to change their driving habits. And he said, these are people who are my children in church, and they disobey me over and over again, and they get themselves in a situation where they're on the verge of going to hell, but somehow they recognize it and they seek me, and I save them at the last minute, and they get themselves close to me. They get themselves right with me at the last minute. So this is a third type of person and driver. The fourth type of driver, he said, these are the people who don't obey the traffic laws all the time, and they don't really observe any consequences from it. They don't get tickets, they don't get in accidents, nothing really bad happens, and they're able to get away with this behavior. So then they end up not seeing any reason to change their dangerous habits. They're never going to change because they don't have to. And they always upset people on the road, but since there's no direct consequence, they don't really think it's a big deal. These are the type of people that end up extremely entitled and lacking in humility. And others might even be jealous of their so-called luck. Yet these non-humble people are in the most trouble with God, and they will be punished most severely in the end. So he said that he told me that not being punished or disciplined when it's needed is actually the worst thing that can happen to someone. He said from his perspective, because disobedience, which is not disciplined, usually creates dangerous habits, which ultimately lead to entitlement, rude behavior, weak character, sin, and death, ultimately, like spiritual death. So using this analogy, you can see how unrepentant people who follow their own will end up in the lake of fire due to their deadly habits. This is sort of a quote from him, kind of. He said, they simply have not asked me to discipline them or to help them create new habits, and I won't force them to. So he said, remember that whenever you are being punished because of disobedience to my good and just laws, count it as a wonderful blessing. He said, since I only discipline those who are mine, those who seek to do my will, and I allow those who are not seeking to do my will to follow their own will. Of course, following one's own will is ultimately a great illusion, and I only allow it for a period of time. But just know, in the end, living a life which serves any master other than me is the path to eternal separation from me. And it always manifests itself as spiritual torment and death. And then he gave me a scripture, Proverbs 14:12. There is a way which seems right to a man, but it ends in the way of death. Sorry. And he said, in order to obey me, you only need to have a large enough perspective. And remember, there are very important reasons for all my laws. You may not always understand them, but always remember they're there to keep you safe. Use them to bring yourself closer to me. This is why I designed you to have a loving and fulfilling relationship with me for eternity. Thank you for watching, you guys. And I'll be making a part 5 to this series in a moment. And you guys just get ready. We're going home soon. I'm really excited. I really am. Okay, I'll see you in part 5.